Good evening, class. Today we're going to be talking about the problem of human scale when it comes to effective governance. Now, in the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton has this to say. He says, "Nothing is more certain than the indispensable necessity of government." We know that to be true. He goes on to say that, in a very Hobbesian view, that we need to give up some of our natural freedoms so that this government could have its necessary powers. He goes on to mention how worthy of a consideration, therefore, it should be that for all purposes be one nation under one federal government, or that they should divide themselves into separate confederacies and give to the head of each the same kind of powers which they are advised to place in one nation or one national government. Watching Dr. Livingston's videos have really put things in perspective when it comes to scale. I've always believed that the United States has grown too big to effectively govern itself. And we can see that, especially now with the polarization of the political parties. But to be honest, the needs of me living in a border city might not align to your needs to wherever it is that you're living. That being said, we see an issue when populations grow too much, are unable to effectively govern or meet the needs of those people. Now, government cannot function on a grand scale, and small scale government is ideal. This comes from Aristotle and his ideal of the polis, that being the ideal republic form. And the Articles of Confederation, which failed, actually got some things right in the sense that it gave political sovereignty to the states. And they were loosely in a confederation with the agreement that, they would aid each other. Now, that portion of the Articles of Confederation was poorly written and should have been revisited, which was the point of the Constitutional Convention, except they scrapped the whole Articles of Confederation and started new. But even early on in the American Constitution, it kind of favored the idea that these states were sovereign. And I'm going to point to the power of nullification. If a federal government passed something, states had the right to nullify that law or that act. And for the most part, it worked. Now, throughout the history, other states threatened to secede and other states threatened to nullify certain laws. But it wasn't until the Civil War where Lincoln comes in, and like Dr. Livingston mentioned, he has a very Hobbesian view of government and says that states are not sovereign entities and they cannot just leave when they want to. Now, granted that nullification granted them the power of being sovereign, but not only that, when the Confederate States of America, when they broke away, when they attempted to break away, they cited Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence and a lot of Enlightenment thinkers, the idea that if a government no longer functioned for the people, that the people had the right to abolish or replace it. And so the people in the South were simply just doing that. Now, that is a very Thomas Jefferson ideal of confederacies and being able to break away. And Dr. Livingston mentioned how Thomas Jefferson foresaw that when it came to the United States under the Constitution, that they would be bounded together from sea to sea, right? The whole continent wide. There would be 4 confederacies of territories together, which in need be were able to come together for common purpose of defense. But besides that, they were their own separate sovereign entities that would deal with their own people. And that is the ideal form of government. Now, again, nullification is the perfect example that shows that states were sovereign before Lincoln went in there and changed it. Now, prior, and this is one thing that I always tell my students, is prior to the Civil War, if you were to ask someone, if a foreigner were to ask someone, where are you from? The majority of the answer would come from the state that they were in. They would say, I'm a Virginian, I'm a Texan, New Yorkian, or whatever they're called. That was the go-to response of the people. living in those states. That's because they identified and saw themselves in that sovereign state that they belonged to. It wasn't until after the Civil War, when nationalism really started to take over at the turn of the 1900s, that that kind of goes away. Now, you still kind of have that. You know, where are you in Texan and all that. But it wasn't until later where this idea of an American comes out. And so that is another key clue in our past that shows us that states in themselves were considered sovereign. Now, Dr. Livingston does mention that Republican or republic in the traditional sense, it needs to be small, ideally small, and that's what, again, Aristotle backed up. That they need to be small in size for them to be effective and effectively represent the people that need them. So when it comes to size and scale, if you grow too big, for sure, you're not able to manage and run things. And so you end up with the trouble that we find ourselves in now. Before I close up this video, I just want to mention that when you really think about the size and scale of the United States and how many people are living here, the needs of me living on the border as a property owner, I feel that security towards my property and my safety is very, very important. And that's to say that, you know, across the river from here, the violence in Mexico because of cartels has been escalating. Spillage does happen. Border protection is very, very important. That might not be the same for you all who are further into the country. So small scale government would most effectively take care of that, as opposed to a national government. Let me point to a perfect example in history to back up this claim. This is a book from John Adams. It is titled Murder and Intrigue on the Mexican Border. This event took place in my city back in 1912 during the Mexican Revolution. There was a rancher that lived a couple of miles north of here along the riverbank who was kidnapped and murdered. Now, the governor at the time, Governor Colquitt, butted heads with Woodrow Wilson because the governor wanted to protect Texas citizens and its property, but it was not able to do that because, according to the Constitution, only the federal government is allowed to send troops into a foreign country. Now, the governor wanted to send the Texas Rangers and the National Guard to chase Mexican rebels who were constantly plaguing the border and border cities. He was unable to do that because of the limits placed on the state of Texas by the federal government. However, if it was under the Articles of Confederation, the governor would have totally different tools to be able to protect the Rancho Vergara. And even in modern day, the governor would be able to protect Texas citizens along the border. This is a wonderful book. I highly recommend you all pick it up. In a large-scale government, they're not going to know what I need out in Washington. My representative is going to get drowned out by all the other representatives that are eagerly trying to get their deals across the table.